Well, good morning, Fellowship of the Cross. What a day yesterday was. We have a new addition to our family, a little puppy named Bill. Very excited to have him with us. Um, and you can ask me at a different time why we chose that name. Has nothing to do with anyone we know or whatever, but that's not a subject for this video. I sensed some chuckles when I said his name. So, we're talking about God's law. Been reading about some more things that have to do with the law of jealousy, the law of the Nazarites, the law of the land of Canaan, different things. Story of Miriam and the leprosy. And, the book of Numbers is really the adolescence of God's people, the teenage years, so to speak. And we know what adolescents tend to do. There's a certain level of waking up to their existence and who they are under their leadership, that they begin to rebel in big ways and whine and those types of things. They're not fully adulted yet and don't see the blessings of their leadership, at least for the most part, with some people. And so that's really what goes on in this book. There is some maturity, there's growing up, some realization, but at the same time, there's a lot of kicking against the goads as far as their father. And yesterday was an interesting, as I reflect on it, I see a lot of Numbers-esque things that took place in Andrews in my experience. Now, we as God's people, we have a tendency to, and I don't know why we do this, maybe it's just the human condition, but we have a tendency to think that if God is with us continually and his power is there and we're following him, then, poof, God's just going to translate us here and do a miracle there and make this path easy there. And that's not at all the indication that we get anywhere in Scripture. You encounter any people of God, New Testament or Old, their lives are full of struggle and pain and difficulty. But that does not mean that they're disobeying God. It does not mean that they're not following him. It means that they're in his tutelage, his training. He's leading them and guiding them. You got to understand that the nation of Israel was in the wilderness for 40 years because of their own disobedience. But even if they would have been obedient, they still would have been in the wilderness for a while. They had to eat manna and quail to survive. At first, it was just manna. Quail came along, but it was after whining and complaining. God's presence was with them, but he didn't just translate them into the promised land. He didn't wipe out the Nephilim before they even got there. They had to do things. They had to participate in his miraculous power. And God took the walls of Jericho down. We know that story, but they had to march around it 7 times and have faith. Jericho's not the size of a little house. It's a big city. And they were in the presence of these Jerichoians, I guess you could say, standing up on the wall with their swords and throwing rocks and stones at them and that types of thing, taunting them. It was difficult. There was a lot of difficulties going on. And yesterday for us was a day of difficulty, a day where we potentially could question God's presence. But God was indeed present. Both of us in each home group will talk about how he was present and the things that he did. But I want to leave you with this. There's 2 types of people in the story of the Exodus, that for the sake of this video. There's the people that are with God, following him in his presence, witnessing his power, witnessing his glory, witnessing the things that he did, the parting of the Red Sea, the tearing down of the walls of Jericho, the providing of the food, the pillar of fire and the pillar of cloud. The miracles that he did, even through the law, like the law of jealousy and that type of thing. But yet their lives were full of struggle and pain and difficulty and training and obedience, tedious work. So much so that they complained and wanted to be like the other group of people. Who are the other group of people? Those who stayed behind in Egypt. They stayed behind in the system. They stayed behind in slavery. They stayed behind in their slumber. They didn't witness the pillar of cloud and pillar of fire. They didn't see the parting of the Red Sea. They never got to experience the walls of Jericho, the crossing of the Jordan River. They didn't witness how God went before them and wiped out their enemies. They didn't eat supernatural food. In many ways, they had it easier. And why is that? Because the Jews who were in the wilderness even said, we wish that we would be back in Egypt. It was easier for us. At least we could eat better food. At least our lives were more simple. And I think sometimes as human beings, that's what we desire, isn't it? Like what I said last week, people truly don't necessarily want to be free. They want to be controlled. And we see that in this story. But when God calls us out and calls us to freedom and calls us to come out and touch not the unclean thing, calls us to follow him, calls us to be obedient, calls us to be steadfast and stalwart in his presence, it's not a joyride. It's not easy street. We're in training. And God's about the business of training out Egypt from us. And it can be difficult. It doesn't mean that God doesn't love us. It doesn't mean that God's not with us. If there's pain, if there's struggle, if there's difficulty, if there's challenges, it means that God is there leading you. At one point in time yesterday, I laid hands on the car on the side of Route 322, stranded. I said, God, just heal the car right now in Yeshua's name. He didn't do it the way I wanted him to. The car is dead, sitting in our driveway, stinking up the whole neighborhood. But we're here. We're home with new life and new perspective. I challenge you. There's not 3 possible places for the Jews. There's only 2. In God's presence on the way to the promised land, or in slavery. No longer God's people. What happens to God's people who stay behind? They're never in his presence again. The only way to the promised land is through God's tutelage in the desert. You need to make a decision which one you'll be. Get to discussion.